Thưa bác sĩ, sức khỏe của vợ tôi thế nào ạ?
Không sao, phim X quang cho thấy chỉ là cảm cúm nhẹ thôi.
Dạ, cảm ơn bác sĩ.
Hello, dear audience. Today, we bring you a deeply emotional story about Tieu Lac and CEO Quan, a story that will surely touch your heart. After the Lunar New Year, while everyone was still enjoying time with their families, Tieu Lac chose to stay behind and manage the entire farm on her own. Not wanting to worry anyone, she worked from early morning until late at night, despite the freezing weather and her growing exhaustion. Eventually, her body gave in. She collapsed and lay in bed with a high fever for 2 days in the silent farmhouse. At that very moment, CEO Quan returned from the city after the holiday. Carrying gifts and plans to surprise her, he never expected to find her unconscious and burning with fever. Without hesitation, he rushed her to the hospital and stayed by her side all night. The powerful, cold CEO in the business world transformed into the most gentle and devoted man when she needed him the most. After this painful moment, will Tieu Lac finally allow herself to lean on him instead of carrying everything alone? And will their relationship move to a new chapter? If you love heartfelt, romantic stories filled with emotion and meaningful drama like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next episodes about Tieu Lac and CEO Quan. Thank you for always supporting us. The days after Lunar New Year were always the loneliest at the farm. The festive laughter had faded, the red decorations had been taken down, and the wide fields returned to their quiet, endless rhythm. This year felt even colder. A thin mist lingered over the vegetable rows each morning, clinging to the earth as if reluctant to leave. Tieu Lac stood alone in the middle of it all, her small figure wrapped in a worn jacket, determined to keep everything running smoothly. Since most of the workers had not yet returned from their hometowns, she insisted on handling everything by herself. The chickens still needed feeding before sunrise, the vegetable beds required watering and inspection, the storage room had to be reorganized after the holiday rush. She told herself it was only temporary. She could manage. She had always managed. But the farm was larger than it looked when one person had to do every task alone. Her mornings began in the dark. She would light a small lamp in the kitchen, boil water for a quick cup of tea, and head out into the cold air before the sun rose. Frost bit into her fingers as she carried heavy buckets across the yard. The wind swept across the open land, cutting through her clothes and chilling her skin. Still, she kept going, moving from the chicken coop to the vegetable greenhouse, from the tool shed to the irrigation lines. By noon, her back ached and her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. She barely noticed. There was always something else waiting to be done. A broken fence needed fixing. A sick goat required medicine. The soil in the greenhouse was too dry and had to be carefully watered by hand. She skipped proper meals, replacing them with quick bites of bread and cold leftovers, promising herself she would rest later. Later never came. On the second day, a dull headache began to press against her temples. She paused for a moment beside the wooden table in the farmhouse, closing her eyes as dizziness washed over her. The room seemed to tilt slightly, but she steadied herself by gripping the edge of the table. "I'm fine," she whispered into the empty house. Outside, the wind grew stronger. The sky turned gray, heavy with the promise of rain. She forced herself back to work, ignoring the shiver creeping up her spine. Her body felt strangely light, as if her strength were slowly draining away without her permission. By evening, the headache had intensified into a burning fever. Her cheeks flushed unnaturally, and her breathing grew uneven. She managed to stumble back into her bedroom, her steps unsteady against the wooden floor. The once familiar space now felt distant and blurry. As she collapsed onto the bed, her entire body trembled uncontrollably. Heat radiated from her skin, yet she felt unbearably cold. The blanket felt both too heavy and not enough. Sweat dampened her hair, sticking it to her forehead. In her half-conscious state, memories began to surface like fragments of a dream, a steady voice encouraging her during difficult harvests, a reassuring hand on her shoulder when the farm almost failed, a pair of eyes filled with quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. Through her fevered haze, she saw him clearly. She wanted to tell him she was tired, that for once she didn't want to be strong. Her lips parted slightly, and in a faint whisper, barely audible even to herself, she called his name. Then, darkness slowly wrapped around her, and the small farmhouse returned to silence, holding her fragile form in the cold embrace of the winter night. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the quiet road leading to the farm, as a sleek black car slowly came to a stop at the familiar wooden gate. CEO Quan had just returned from the city after spending the Lunar New Year with his family. The city had been filled with lights, celebrations, and endless business calls. But even in the middle of crowded gatherings, his thoughts had often drifted back to one place, the quiet countryside where Tieu Lac lived and worked. He had not told her he was coming that day. He wanted it to be a small surprise. In the back seat were carefully chosen gifts: specialty tea from the city, a warm wool scarf he thought would suit her, and a box of her favorite sweets he had once noticed she liked but rarely bought for herself. A faint smile appeared on his lips as he imagined her shy expression when she saw him standing at the door. But the moment he stepped out of the car, something felt wrong. The farm was too quiet. There were no soft sounds of animals being fed, no light humming from the greenhouse machines, no figure moving briskly across the yard. Even the chickens seemed unusually still. The air felt heavy, pressing against his chest with a strange unease. "Tieu Lac?" he called out gently as he walked toward the house. No answer. His steps quickened. The front door was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped inside, expecting to hear her familiar voice from the kitchen. Silence. The small living room was dim, the curtains half drawn. A cup sat untouched on the wooden table, long gone cold. His heartbeat began to pound louder in his ears. "Tieu Lac!" This time his voice was firmer, edged with worry. Still nothing. A sudden wave of panic surged through him as he moved toward the bedroom. He pushed the door open and froze. She lay motionless on the bed. Her face was pale, almost translucent against the white pillow. Strands of damp hair clung to her forehead. Her lips were slightly parted, her breathing shallow and uneven. The blanket had slipped to the side, and even from where he stood, he could see the unnatural flush on her cheeks. In 2 long strides, he was beside her. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed his palm to her forehead and immediately pulled back in shock. She was burning with fever. "Why didn't you call me?" he whispered, guilt flooding his chest. He noticed the faint dark circles beneath her eyes, the exhaustion written into every fragile line of her face. It didn't take much to understand what had happened. She must have tried to handle everything alone again. She always did. Anger at himself replaced the initial shock. He should have checked on her sooner. He should have known she wouldn't rest. Gently, he lifted her into his arms. She felt far lighter than he remembered, her body limp against his chest. For a moment, she stirred slightly, her head falling weakly against his shoulder. Through a barely conscious murmur, she whispered something. His name. His heart clenched painfully. "I'm here," he said urgently, tightening his hold. "I'm here now." Without wasting another second, he carried her out to the car. The cold air hit his face, but he barely felt it. All his focus was on the fragile woman in his arms. He laid her carefully in the back seat, supporting her head with his coat, then rushed to the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and he sped down the rural road toward the nearest hospital. The entire drive, his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. His usually calm, controlled demeanor had vanished, replaced by raw fear. Every red light felt too long. Every turn felt too slow. For the first time in a long while, the powerful CEO who commanded respect in boardrooms felt completely helpless. All he could think was one thing: please be okay. The hospital corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and quiet urgency. Fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors as nurses moved efficiently from room to room. CEO Quan stood beside the emergency bed, watching as doctors examined Tieu Lac with careful precision. Her skin was still flushed from fever, her breathing shallow but steady. After what felt like an endless stretch of time, the doctor finally turned to him. "She's severely exhausted and dehydrated," the doctor explained. "High fever caused by overwork and prolonged exposure to cold weather. You brought her in just in time. If she had remained like that much longer, it could have developed into something more serious." Just in time. Those words echoed in his mind. Relief washed over him so suddenly that he had to steady himself against the wall. He nodded quietly, thanking the doctor, but inside he felt a deep wave of guilt. He had always admired her independence, her strength, her refusal to rely on anyone. But now he realized how lonely that strength must have been. When she was transferred to a private room to rest, he didn't leave. He rolled up his sleeves and carefully helped the nurse adjust the IV line. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his posture no longer that of a powerful executive, but simply a man worried for someone he cared about deeply. The room was silent, except for the steady beep of the monitor. He dipped a soft cloth into warm water and gently pressed it against her forehead, replacing it whenever it cooled. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if afraid even the slightest mistake might cause her discomfort. Every so often, he would brush a strand of hair away from her face, his fingers lingering for just a second longer than necessary. When the nurse brought in a bowl of light porridge, he insisted on feeding her himself once she was stable enough to swallow. He lifted her gently, supporting her back with one arm, bringing the spoon carefully to her lips. "Just a little," he murmured softly. "You need strength." Even in her half-conscious state, she seemed to respond to his voice. Her brows relaxed slightly, and her breathing became calmer. Night fell quietly outside the hospital window. The city lights flickered in the distance, but inside the room, time seemed to stand still. He refused to go home. When the nurse suggested he rest, he simply shook his head. "I'll stay," he said firmly. Around midnight, exhaustion finally caught up with him. Still holding her hand, he rested his head against the edge of the bed, never fully asleep, alert to every small movement she made. Just before dawn, her fingers twitched weakly in his grasp. His eyes opened instantly. Slowly, her eyelids fluttered. The world around her was blurry at first, shapes and light blending together. Then her gaze settled on him, on the man who was sitting so close, eyes filled with worry and tenderness. "Quan," she whispered faintly. He leaned forward immediately, relief flooding his face. "I'm here," he replied low, his voice but steady. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore." Her eyes grew moist, not from fever this time, but from emotion. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable and safe. As the first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the window, warmth slowly replaced the cold fear of the night before. And in that quiet hospital room, something deeper than gratitude settled between them, a silent promise that from now on, they would face everything together.